What's going on, you guys? I am Brad Milkey, and welcome to the Debrief. Busy news day today, so let's get going. First of all, we will lead with the shutdown. What is happening on day 27? How is it affecting Americans out there? We'll take you to California, where we have seen some devastating mudslides and some heavy weather. And the Women's March, the third annual Women's March, happening on Saturday. There's controversy this year, though. We have the organizers. We will be talking with them right now. First of all, let's hit today's top headlines.
The Wall Street Journal reports that Michael Cohen hired a tech firm for $50,000 in 2015 in advance of the presidential campaign, trying to rig unofficial online polls to favor his boss, Donald Trump. Cohen says in a response on Twitter this morning that what he did, quote, was at the direction of and for the sole benefit of Trump.
A Georgia man's now facing federal charges accused of plotting to launch attacks on federal buildings, including the White House. BJ Pak is the U.S. attorney in Atlanta.
His alleged intent was to attack the White House by using explosive devices, including an improvised explosive device, an anti-tank rocket.
The suspect, Hashir Tahab, was arrested after a year-long investigation.
Good morning, everyone. I want to call the MSU Board of Trustees meeting to order.
This morning at a meeting of the Board of Trustees at Michigan State University.
As chairperson of the Board of Trustees, I move that the Board of Trustees of Michigan State University hereby accepts John M. Engler's resignation.
And they have accelerated his resignation.
Effective immediately.
Engler stepping down after saying last week that he believed some of the victims of convicted sex abuser Larry Nassar were enjoying their moment in the spotlight.
It's been more than 2 years since Muhammad Ali, the greatest, left us. Now, the native of Louisville is getting a big honor. The airport there is being renamed for him officially Louisville Muhammad Ali International Airport.
And you know, before this week, the longest shutdown we had ever seen was 21 days long, 3 weeks. Well, right now, this shutdown is rolling up on 4 weeks, and there's still no end in sight right now. Well, yesterday, Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi went all hardcore and said, we were not going to have a State of the Union address until this gets sorted out. So, is that moving the ball at all? Let's go to the White House right now. ABC's Jordan Phelps is on the North Lawn. And so, Jordan, day 27, is there any end in sight here?
Hey, Brad, great to see you. And no, there is no end in sight. If anything, it seems both sides are just digging in. We did see some Democrats come to the White House yesterday, but despite the name of the people that came over here, it was the Problem Solvers Caucus. These aren't actually the people who are in any position to solve this problem, Brad. Right now, it's between the president, Nancy Pelosi, and the rest of the Democratic leadership who are not talking. And Nancy Pelosi really upped the ante with that letter, suggesting to the president that they delay his State of the Union. Now, of course, Pelosi says she's thinking about security concerns here. But, Brad, I got to tell you, on this side of Pennsylvania Avenue, it's hard to see that as anything but a political power play. And I got to tell you, Brad, it has left the president speechless. We have yet to hear him speak out on this. It's notable how silent he's been. It's been over 24 hours now. And I just caught up with Sarah Sanders in the halls of the West Wing to ask when might we see a response. And she only said, we'll keep you posted.
Well, and that's the thing, right? This is clearly a power play by Nancy Pelosi, but does it actually move the needle, Jordan? Is there something here that would actually push this ball forward?
Brad, what it does is it shows that Nancy Pelosi has some strings to pull here, and it really is interesting to see Nancy Pelosi, this tried political animal, really taking on the president and really sort of beating him at his own game in this way. Now, Brad, I might expect the White House to, when they do respond, come back with something clever. We know this is a president who loves to give big campaign speeches. I wouldn't rule out the president maybe going out into the country and giving a speech somewhere else, seeking out different venues to do this. He could also deliver the speech from the Oval Office. That's another alternative, or perhaps even the Senate chambers where the Republicans are still in control. But Brad, the optics just aren't the same in those venues as the State of the Union, where you have members from both sides of the aisle standing up and applauding the president. So right now, Brad, the White House doesn't have their plan honed, or at least they haven't made it public. So we're waiting to see how they respond. But for right now, this is where we are.
Yeah, but that is interesting, this idea that just because you need an invitation to speak on the floor of Congress doesn't mean you need an invitation to speak if you're the president.
Absolutely.
So we might still see him anyway. Hey, let me ask you, Jordan, about Rudy Giuliani, because he made news last night when the president's lawyer said there might have been collusion. He seems to suggest there might have been collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. It just wasn't the president of the United States that knew about it.
Yeah, Brad, this was a real jaw dropper, a head shaker of a soundbite from the president's lawyer, suggesting that he never said that there was no collusion. He just said there was no collusion with the president. But as CNN's Chris Cuomo quickly pointed out to Rudy Giuliani, yes, you did say that there was no collusion. So this has spurred all sorts of speculation of whether, Giuliani might have been setting the stage for some big bombshell to drop and to sort of say, oh, that's no big deal. This is what we've been saying all along. But at that point, Brad, this is just speculation.
All right, that is Jordan Phelps at the White House. Thanks for checking in, Jordan. And the president right now is actually going to speak at the Pentagon, speaking today, talking about technologies in U.S. missile defense. But the White House is still facing questions over the death of 4 service members in Syria. As they say, ISIS has been defeated. ABC senior national correspondent Terry Moran is in Washington right now. And Terry, it struck me that even after that attack, the vice president, Mike Pence, continued this White House line of ISIS has been defeated. Would the Pentagon agree with him?
It was awkward, and it depends, I guess, on what the meaning of the word defeat is from the president and the vice president's perspective, because ISIS no longer controls that giant swath of territory that they rolled through in 2015, all the way through northern Syria, all the way into Iraq, down almost to the city of Ramadi in Iraq, because they have been driven from control of that territory and are really now hiding out in holes and neighborhoods in some of these cities. That means they are defeated. But obviously they can still strike Americans. There are thousands of ISIS fighters in Iraq and in Syria. By some measure, many thousands. They have not disappeared. They've kind of faded back into the background. They still obviously have some kind of operational system in order to carry out the deadly attack that they did yesterday in the city of Manbij in Syria. It's the deadliest day for Americans since they entered Syria 4 years ago now, 2015. And so you see there the devastation in that restaurant. It was where the Americans were. A suicide attack suggests that ISIS is not defeated.
Well, that's right. And even if the talk about winning, though, it might be overhyped from what we've heard about it, there is somebody who says for things as normal don't seem to be working that great either, right, if we're still seeing this. So as the president talked about on the campaign trail, I think a lot of Americans are asking, what are we doing? What are we doing in the Middle East? I mean, what is the strategy, even if people like Lindsey Graham say we've got to stay the course?
Right. That is a question that Americans have, and it's one the president has had, and he has been determined, as was the last president, not to, in their minds, waste so much American energy in the world, in one part of the world, in the Middle East. President Obama tried to get out of Iraq. He tried to not go into Syria. He tried to just stay away, tried to reorient American foreign policy toward rising China, the challenge there, and the rest of the world. He couldn't. President Trump has tried as well. So what are we doing in Syria? Well, because Syria is such a complicated snake pit of just venomous kinds of forces. This foreign policy and military establishment have been telling these presidents, you can't not get in that game. Everybody else is. Iran, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey. And unfortunately, that is one of the most strategic areas of the world because there's so much oil there. God made all the dinosaurs down there is the old joke. But it's deadly serious that it is strategically crucial. And to get out and leave it to the other countries would damage American interests. But President Trump wants out. Those American troops are coming out. Obviously, they just have to do it as they now acknowledge, not right away, which President Trump made it sound like, but gradually, orderly, coordinated with allies, and safely.
Yeah, easy enough to say that ISIS has been defeated, but you try telling that today to 4 grieving American families. That's Terry Moran in Washington. Thanks a lot, Terry. Another story that we are tracking today is the weather that has rolled into the West Coast, creating the concern from mudslides, and that is exactly what we've ended up seeing happening. Leticia Juarez works with our affiliate KABC in Los Angeles. She is in Lake Elsinore right now. And so, Leticia, I mean, what are we seeing?
Well, right now what you're seeing, Brad, is the rain coming down here in Lake Elsinore, which is roughly about 80 miles southeast of Los Angeles. This area was devastated by the Holy Fire this past summer, and what residents, especially in the community I'm standing in now, are dealing with is the potential for some life-threatening mudslides. I want to point out that I'm standing here with this home in the background. This home right here back on December 6th was hit by mud. The gentleman inside there was bedridden, had to be rescued and floated out because the mud had come up to his home. They have K-rails in front of that home now because they're hoping that any potential mudslide from this rain that is coming now could potentially flow around that barrier and out into the street here. Now, the concern is here especially is that the burn scar is holding much of the debris up there still. From talking with emergency folks, they say a lot of it still has yet to come down. We've had back-to-back storms starting on Monday, so the ground is just soaked. The saturation levels is what they're concerned about. They say it doesn't take much rain to start causing that debris flow that they're really concerned about for residents. So this morning, 3,500 residents were told to leave their homes, and a mandatory evacuation was issued. Right now, residents here are just waiting and seeing, holding their breath, hoping that another devastating mud flow does not come into their communities. Brad, back to you.
All right, Leticia, thank you so much there in Lake Elsinore, California. I want to move on to another big story that we're tracking in Washington. Coming up in a couple days, the 3rd annual Women's March. You remember the incredible sights and sounds in Washington and around the country a couple of years ago when we saw millions of women across the country. Well, now we've got the next installment of this. However, there has been controversy this year, and so I want to go to the group's national organizers here, Linda Sarsour, a national board member, and Rachel Carmona, the chief operating officer for the march. Thank you for coming on the debrief, ladies.
Thank you for having us.
Well, so in the last few days, let's just cut right to the chase here, because the last few days, we've seen a bunch of organizations cut ties with you. The Democratic Party says it's not really affiliated with the march, but also the NAACP, Amnesty International, the Human Rights Campaign, the pro-gay rights movement. So critics are calling your organization out for not condemning Louis Farrakhan from the Nation of Islam for his anti-Semitic remarks, for his homophobic remarks. So what do you say to women, particularly Jewish women, but all women, to convince them that they are welcome in this weekend's march?
Thank you, Brad, for asking that. Just one correction, the NAACP continues to be a strong partner of the Women's March, and they are actually speaking at the rally on Saturday. This is a movement that is intersectional. We are trying to bring together women from across the country, different religious backgrounds, different political ideologies, and it's hard to do, and it's a messy movement, and that is why it has never been done before. So we understand that there will be schisms, there's going to be hard conversations that need to be had, but our controversy is not more controversial than an administration that cages children, an administration who has the government shut down, where workers have not gotten paid in 4 weeks. So we will work through this as a women's movement because we are focused on what the real threat to this country is, and it is this administration and white supremacy. So we're looking forward to a lobby day. We are unveiling an intersectional, bold policy platform that you will see. It is going to be a historic document that was created and led by women. And on Saturday, we will march, and we will march in the streets of Washington, D.C., rain or shine or snow. The women's movement is here. The
leadership, though, of the group, can you guys categorically condemn what Louis Farrakhan has said in the past about saying I'm not anti-Semite, I'm anti-termite, things like that?
We have done that many times. I will welcome people to go to our website at womensmarch.com. We have multiple statements where we have unequivocally rejected anti-Semitism, homophobia, Islamophobia, transphobia, and that is the movement that we are a part of.
You as a group have condemned them, but Tamika Mallory has not. She refused to on The View. Will she be at this march? Will she be organizing still?
She, in fact, has. I would welcome you to watch a Breakfast Club interview that she did this week where she unequivocally rejected anti-Semitism, and on The View, she was put in a very hard position by Meghan McCain, and we were not in that position. And I believe in Tamika Mallory's leadership and that she is a woman that stands up for all people. So she recently has made those comments on The Breakfast Club, and I welcome everyone who has any questions to go watch that interview.
When we talk about the march coming up this weekend, we are seeing smaller venues being asked for. We're seeing potentially smaller groups being expected by authorities. Has this controversy hurt the movement? Is it a different movement? What should we be looking for this weekend?
All movements are always changing and evolving and things like that, and so when we're talking about what the marches look like, we've got over 280 marches all across the country, and while our groups are marching, they are doing that, but they are also lobbying, they are also working with elected officials, they're also doing ongoing work in their communities. And so when you look back at the first march was kind of the historic, you know, that was where it began, but our movement now has breadth and depth, and so the way that the activism looks is very diverse, just like the folks who are going to be marching with us. And so I think it's reductive to say that it's just marches, and when we're doing this work and moving forward, it's going to be tactics that are rising to meet the rising threat of, you know, the rollbacks on women's rights all across the country.
And just to be, and quickly, Brad, we marched in 2017 in the largest single-day demonstration in American history, and we made a declaration that we will win back the House in 2018, and that is what we did. We put over 110 women, many of whom progressives and women of color. In 2019, with this policy agenda, we have a tangible policy agenda that we believe wholeheartedly we can actually pass many of what we have proposed or what we are supporting by 2020, and it will be a conversation starter for 2020. If you can't give me a position as a presidential candidate on these policy positions that we have put together, then don't come knocking on the door of progressive women across America. So the movement is going to evolve, because this is not about putting millions of women in the streets. It's about what we do when we go to the polls. And women have proved across the country, particularly women of color and black women, that we know who our leaders should be and when they should be there, and we're going to make sure that happens in 2020.
I was just going to say that the question in 2017 was, what kind of action will we actually see from this march? And I guess you would say the 2018 results speak for themselves, and we will see what happens going forward. Thank you very much for being with us. I want to move on right now to what we're seeing back on the West Coast. You remember how we saw some of those rains? Well, there are a lot of people out in that rain right now because the teachers' strike in LA, the country's second largest school district, teachers are still striking there. I want to turn to Romina Puga, our correspondent on the ground there. Romina, what are you seeing?
Hey, Brad. So it is the day 4 of the teacher strike. As you can see behind me, we're at Hancock Park Elementary School. Tons of teachers, parents, students picketing, even across the street as well. They had their music on, they're chanting, cars are honking as they come by. These teachers, parents, and students are braving the pouring rain this morning. It's cold, it's raining 4 days in a row of hard rain here in LA. Not the best week for a strike, but they're all out here for something that they believe in. Again, this district includes 900 schools, and to put into perspective, Brad, you're in Manhattan right now. This district is 32 times the size of Manhattan, affecting 30,000 teachers that are striking without pay. This school alone has about 2 or 3 teachers that are married to other teachers, both striking. Those are families that are not getting any income during this strike, but there is a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. Today at noon, LAUSD and UTLA are meeting to hopefully negotiate the contracts again, with the mayor's office mediating. So some teachers are hopeful, but I spoke to some UTLA reps, Jill and Larry, who are saying that, you know, teachers shouldn't expect to get back into the classrooms tomorrow. Guys, what do you think will come out of today's negotiations?
I'm not very hopeful at all, because our superintendent, Austin Butner, is not an honest person. Here's a vocabulary word for the day: duplicitous. He is dishonest and deceptive. We have a $2 billion surplus, the biggest in history, and he says he can't use any of it. I'm not very hopeful today, honestly.
So tomorrow you guys are expecting to have another big rally. You think that'll still happen?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's happening.
We're downtown City Hall. Over 30,000 of us will be there, yeah.
I'm actually feeling a little more optimistic in the sense that we had a board member who was willing to speak his own mind. They were told they were supposed to have one voice, and Scott Schmerlinson spoke up and believes in the teachers. And I am so proud of that, and I'm really excited that that did give me some hope that the board members are starting to speak their own mind and not just following blindly to whatever they're told that they have to say. So I'm feeling a little more hopeful.
Good. That's the right attitude.
I am.
And Brad, I want to go over a bit some of the demands again. It's not just higher pay, but it's also essential staff. A lot of these schools don't have full-time nurses. We met one parent, Kevin, whose son needs to have insulin shots throughout the day, so he or his wife have to come during their breaks because there's only a nurse once a week here. Kevin, can you tell me a bit about what you and your wife have to do for your son?
Well, we have two children that go here, Aiden and London, and Aiden is type 1 diabetic. So my wife had to stop working to take care of him because we only have one nurse here 1 day a week.
Yeah.
So she has to come and give him insulin for lunch and breakfast.
So you're hoping that with this strike, we'll get more resources for the schools and your kids will be taken care of?
Yes, we only have one nurse here, which is Cindy Bitterman, and she's a really, really good nurse, but it's only 1 day a week, and
Yeah.
we need more nurses here to take care of our children.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Brad?
All right, Romina Puga on the ground there. It seems like people are still singing and chanting behind you, even in that cold, rainy weather right there. All right, we'll check in with you later. And I want to go to another story right now that is absolutely fascinating. It's happening here in New York in that it involves the New York Knicks, the basketball team that's not doing that great, but they're in a big game in London right now. One of their star players is not going to be with them. That is Enes Kanter right there, a center on the team. The reason he's not going to be in London is because in parts of Europe, he is a wanted man. That's right. Let's go to Will Reeve, ABC's correspondent who covers sports, politics, everything in between. And so, Will, I mean, what is going on here?
Well, Brad, Enes Kanter, the headline is that Turkey has sought an international arrest and extradition warrant. They want to bring him back to Turkey, and to get into the why is going to take a little bit of time, because you see, Kanter has been a vocal opponent of the Turkish President Erdogan and his regime, and Kanter has been a vocal supporter of a man named Fethullah Gulen. He's an exiled cleric who is now based in Pennsylvania, who has been accused by the current Turkish government of trying to overthrow the government in a failed coup attempt in 2016. So all of the efforts by the current Turkish government to get to Kanter stem from that association with Gulen and that failed coup attempt. But Kanter's not in London because he thinks, and he says, that the Erdogan government might send someone to kill him.
Wait, he thinks he's going to be assassinated if he goes to play in this basketball game?
He is a man without a country. In 2017, Turkey revoked his passport related to all of this, and he is a permanent U.S. resident, but he doesn't have a U.S. passport, so he only can play games in the U.S. and Canada, and he fears that if he goes anywhere, someone from the Turkish government might come to get him. He says he doesn't even go around New York alone, Brad.
Wow, that is an insane story happening today. And this player, Enes Kanter, has been on Capitol Hill. He's been talking to lawmakers, Marco Rubio, Chuck Schumer, everyone in between. Absolutely fascinating. We'll see what happens when the Knicks get back to New York. Will Reeve, thanks a lot, buddy.
You got it.
And so, you know, if you're not watching here every day, I just want to let you know, I actually host a podcast for ABC called Start Here. That drops at 6 in the morning. And every day we try to take a look at a lot of the same stories you might see on the debrief, the stories that you should know about, that you've heard a little bit of the headlines. Also, some stories like that one there that you might not have heard of. And this morning, just want to let you know, we took a look at a fascinating story that's coming out of Africa right now. We got into a crazy story about some of the world's most majestic animals. So, minute and a half. Take a listen to this because the pictures and the sights and sounds just absolutely wild.
And one last thing, picture an elephant. Go ahead, I'll wait. You're probably thinking about big ears, a long trunk, arcing tusks, but in Africa lately, there are herds that look different.
The Addo elephant population in South Africa, they almost every female elephant in that population lacks tusks. So
yeah, that's right. Suddenly, herds of elephants are roaming around, largely without tusks. They're not even born with them.
Showing a high prevalence of tusklessness.
That's Ryan Long, an assistant professor of wildlife science at the University of Idaho.
My research focuses mostly around behavioral and physiological ecology of large mammals.
Like elephants?
Yeah, like elephants, exactly.
And back in the day, he worked at a national park in Mozambique, which had played host to a brutal, bloody civil war.
There was a lot of poaching during that time in order to sell ivory and fund the purchase of arms and ammunition.
And while tusks are a good tool to have,
elephants use their tusks for foraging, for stripping bark from trees. They use them to push trees over.
Suddenly, with all these poachers around,
tusks are suddenly a bad thing.
Call it unnatural selection.
Removing the genes for tusk growth from the population.
The elephants that make it give birth, those genes get passed on, and you wind up with lots of tuskless baby elephants. In some areas, your vision of what an elephant looks like, well, that's becoming more and more rare.
There's definitely a very real possibility that tusklessness in female elephant populations could be something that becomes more the rule than the exception.
So that's the bad news. The good news is these herds are not just surviving, they're thriving.
These tuskless elephants are doing something differently in order to be as successful as they are, but we have no idea what it is.
Researchers have one theory. These elephant matriarchs, they were around in the 90s. And you know what they say about elephant memories? They're good enough to stay the hell away from us.
And that is from this morning's Start Here. A little tasty for you. If you want to subscribe, you should do it. Go to Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. Listen to Start Here. It drops at 6 a.m. Eastern every day. One last thing for you. Finally, happy 97th birthday to Betty White. That's right. The actress was born January 17th, 1922. The president back then, if you care, Warren G. Harding. Betty White. What a gem. All right. That does it here for the debrief. I'm Brad Milkey. We'll see you next time, guys. Later.